I never expected her to remember my name, let alone everything else. It was Tuesday, late evening, the kind of night where the streetlights flicker a little and the coffee shop hums like it's holding its breath. I was sitting at my usual corner table, a half-empty cup of black coffee warming my hands, watching my phone vibrate silently in my pocket. There were 3 unread messages from my friend that I hadn't answered, and another draft I'd never sent to someone who wasn't supposed to see it. Routine. Loneliness, folded neatly into pauses between sips. Then she walked in. I'd known her only peripherally, my friend's mom, in that harmless, almost familial way. But tonight, the air shifted the moment she appeared. She carried herself lightly, almost like she was floating through the door, wearing a wool coat that smelled faintly of jasmine and something I couldn't name. Her eyes scanned the shop, and for a second, they rested on me. That long, quiet look made me feel both seen and exposed. "Hey," she said, softly, like she wasn't announcing her presence to anyone else but me. Her voice had a calm cadence, the sort that didn't demand anything but still drew you in. "Hey," I said, and for a moment I wondered why my voice sounded so ordinary, so flat. She moved to the counter and ordered. I watched the subtle twitch of her fingers as she fiddled with her ring, the small flick of a thumb against the cup. I didn't realize I was staring until she turned and smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't vanish when you look away. "You're drinking it black again," she said, nodding at my cup when she came over with her own. "Don't you ever add sugar?" I shrugged. "Not really. Figure that's because you like the bitterness." She paused, and I thought she might leave it there, but she added, almost in passing, "It's kind of a habit, isn't it?" I swallowed. She had a way of noticing things, little habits no one else would comment on. And suddenly my apartment's half-empty shelves, the untouched books, the drafts I never sent, they all felt somehow visible. We found ourselves talking quietly, neither of us pushing the conversation forward, yet somehow it moved. She laughed at a joke I hadn't meant to be funny, and I felt the slow, curling warmth of a rare connection. When she reached across to fold the napkin I'd left crumpled beside my cup, her hand brushed mine, and I caught the faintest pulse of hesitation in her gesture. I didn't know how long we sat there, the rest of the cafe dim and quiet around us. Time stretched thin, measured only by the soft clink of spoons against mugs and the occasional cough. I noticed the way she looked at the world outside the window, calm, detached, like she carried some secret weight lightly. When she finally stood to leave, I realized I hadn't asked for her number. I hadn't even said much at all, but she paused near the door, just for a beat, and held my gaze. "You're working tomorrow?" she asked, tilting her head, the streetlight catching the silver in her hair. "Yeah," I said, unsure why my throat had gone dry. She smiled again, slower this time. "Good. Well, maybe I'll see you." And then she was gone, leaving behind the faint scent of jasmine and that impossible quiet that makes you notice everything you'd overlooked. My phone buzzed moments later. A message from an unknown number. "I hope you don't mind me texting. Coffee tomorrow." I stared at it for longer than I should have, the corners of my mouth twisting into a half-smile, half-breathless pause. Something in that message, the way it seemed to slip into my life gently, almost innocuously, made me realize that ordinary nights could change without warning. The next afternoon, I found myself hesitating outside her apartment door, holding the paper cup she'd asked me to bring. I hadn't planned to stay long, just a polite drop-off, but the familiar warmth of the doorbell echoing in the quiet hallway made me pause, thumb hovering. She opened it before I could knock again. Her hair was pinned loosely at the back, a few strands escaping, and her sweater smelled faintly of laundry detergent and something floral. "You didn't have to," she said, her voice calm, like she already knew I would. "It's no trouble," I mumbled, handing her the cup. My fingers brushed hers briefly, a small pulse of warmth that lingered longer than it should have. We ended up in her kitchen, sitting at a narrow table with the city muffled behind closed windows. She poured tea from a chipped pot and, without looking at me, said, "My ex kept saying I drank too much tea. I think that's why I drink it now." I blinked. "I didn't know that." She shrugged, stirring slowly. "Not exactly something you tell people." Makes you sound ordinary, I guess. Or pathetic. Maybe ordinary is okay, I said, unsure why the words came out so softly. She glanced up, eyes catching mine for a moment before she looked away. A laugh escaped her, quiet, unpolished. You're 23. You shouldn't have to reassure anyone about anything. I'm not, I said, more to myself than to her. But the truth lingered anyway. The draft emails I never sent, the empty apartment, the way I noticed her without meaning to. I could imagine 1,000 reasons to stop paying attention, and still I didn't. The silence between us wasn't uncomfortable. She reached across to adjust a loose corner of the tablecloth, her fingers brushing mine again. I imagined what it would feel like to lean closer, to say something reckless, to risk it all for this small, fragile moment. But I didn't. You know, she said, almost casually, it's strange. I barely know you, and yet you feel familiar. Dangerous, in a way. I laughed softly, though it didn't reach my eyes. Dangerous how? She shrugged, eyes dropping to the steam rising from her cup. You're younger than I am. Too young, maybe, and you're my friend's age. People would talk if they knew. I nodded, understanding the edges of the boundaries she was sketching. Divorced, late 40s, a child old enough that I was in the picture. The whole world lined up neatly against anything real. And yet, here we were, voices low, hands brushing, the room warm with ordinary moments no one else would witness. She picked up her cup and held it near her lips, letting her thumb graze the rim. I felt the small weight of her gaze linger on me for a beat, longer than necessary, as if testing a possibility she didn't name. When she stood to move toward the sink, she rested a hand lightly on my forearm. Just a touch, brief, casual, but it carried an unspoken weight. I didn't move away. The pulse in her hand matched the one I felt in my chest. I left a little while later, walking down the quiet street with the memory of that hand against mine. I didn't know why that moment stayed with me. Maybe because it felt like someone finally saw me. I saw her at the bookstore first, among the stacks of dog-eared novels, and my chest tightened. She had that same quiet focus, flipping pages like she wasn't aware anyone else existed. I lingered near the poetry section, pretending to scan titles, but really, I was just waiting for her to notice me. She did eventually, a soft glance, the corner of her mouth tilting. No words, just the acknowledgement like a ripple through water. I smiled, but it felt small, hesitant. Hey, I said, voice barely carrying past the hum of the shop. Hey, she replied, brushing a strand of hair from her face. There was a pause, a space that felt too loud. She tucked a book under her arm and shifted. I have to run in a bit. Just grabbing something quick. I nodded, fumbling with the strap of my bag. Something about her tone pulled me in and pushed me back at the same time. I imagined reaching for her hand, or leaning close enough to let my shoulder brush hers. I didn't. A customer walked between us. The moment snapped. She excused herself with a polite nod, and I let her go. Later, we met at the cafe again. I wanted to talk. Really talk. But she seemed smaller somehow, contained. Stirring her latte slowly, tracing the rim of her cup with a fingertip. You've been busy, I asked, trying for casual. She said, eyes not meeting mine. A little. I watched her, noticing the way her shoulders tightened when the door opened, how she flinched at a loud laugh from the corner table. She was careful, like she was balancing herself between wanting and knowing she shouldn't. I wanted to lean in, to tell her something, anything, but my mouth went dry, my hands fidgeted with the straw wrapper. She caught my eye for a heartbeat, a flicker. Then she looked away, focusing on the coffee as if it held all the answers. A friend of hers walked in, someone I knew casually. She froze, almost imperceptibly, and I felt the air between us contract. She smiled politely, excused herself, and left me staring at an empty chair across from me. We lingered in silence after she returned. The cafe was quiet, save for the soft hiss of the espresso machine. I imagined leaning across the table, saying something reckless, daring. I imagined her lips, just close enough, the faint brush of breath. Her hand brushed mine, lightly, almost unconsciously, as she reached for the sugar. I didn't pull away. My thumb traced hers for a second longer than normal. The tension stretched, unspoken. Then she glanced up. Her eyes searched mine, hesitant. There was something there, a question, a risk, but she didn't answer it. She tilted her head, smiled softly, and sipped her latte, leaving the space between us heavy and unclaimed. I want to close it, but I didn't. We left the cafe, walking the quiet street side by side, close but not touching. I thought about saying her name, letting the words hang between us, letting the world fall away. But I swallowed them instead. And yet, in that pause, in the almost touch, the almost word, I knew we were dangerously close. Just a step further, and something would break the careful line we'd drawn. We were walking along the river after work, the city lights shimmering on the dark water. The air was cool, the kind that makes you notice the small things, the way her coat shifted when she moved, the faint scent of her perfume, the scrape of her shoes on the pavement. I tried to talk about something trivial, the new cafe that opened down the street, a book I'd been meaning to read, but my words felt empty against the weight of the evening. She was quiet, hands tucked into her pockets, eyes on the river. I could tell she was holding back like she always did, but tonight there was something sharper in her posture, a tension I hadn't noticed before. "Did someone ask about me today?" I blurted out before I could stop myself. My voice sounded too loud in the hush of the riverbank. She turned, eyebrows lifting. "Someone? I don't know," I said awkwardly. "A friend, someone from work. Just wondering." She smiled faintly, and I felt a tug of something I couldn't name. Her laugh was small, but it didn't reach her eyes. "I don't know why it matters," she said, voice soft, almost like she was convincing herself. I noticed the slight tremor in her hands, how she adjusted the cuff of her sleeve, trying to distract herself. That moment, her fragility, her distance, the way she carried everything and didn't let it go, hit me harder than I expected. I trailed off. Couldn't find the words. Every time I looked at her, I imagined the things I shouldn't, the hand I shouldn't reach for, the voice I shouldn't hear in that tone reserved only for me. She paused by a bench. I hesitated behind her, unsure if I should sit, stand, speak. She looked at the water, then back at me. There was a flicker in her eyes, regret, fear, longing. I couldn't tell. "You know," she said slowly, almost to herself, "sometimes I think about what it would be like if none of it mattered. If rules and expectations and ages and friendships didn't exist." Her voice broke slightly, then steadied. I swallowed. I wanted to say yes or something, anything. But the words refused me. Instead, I stepped closer, not touching, just close enough to feel the quiet gravity between us. Her hand lifted briefly, not fully, just a flick toward mine. Hesitation written across every line. I could have taken it, could have bridged the distance. But I didn't. We sat on the bench in silence, side by side. The water lapped quietly against the embankment. My chest ached in that stillness, the almost moment hanging above us like fragile glass. She glanced at me, and for the first time, I saw all of it. The loneliness, the restraint, the small bursts of desire she hadn't voiced. I opened my mouth to speak, to confess something I didn't fully understand myself. But before the words could escape, she looked away toward the lights across the river. A soft question lingered between us, unspoken but unmistakable. "Do you really want this?" And that question hung there as the wind brushed past us, leaving the river and the city to answer. The next week, she didn't answer my messages. Not the texts, not the missed calls, nothing. I kept my phone on the table at work, checking it every few minutes, imagining she was reading, imagining she wasn't. It wasn't panic, it wasn't anger. Just paused. That strange emptiness where something should be, but isn't. I tried the cafe again, the corner table where we'd lingered over coffee and almost confessions. Empty. I waited, stirring my cup, listening to the hiss of the espresso machine, imagining her slipping in at any moment. She didn't. When she finally appeared, it was different. Distance wrapped around her like a coat she'd pulled tight against me, without saying why. She smiled politely, but her eyes didn't find mine. I wanted to say something, ask something, but I didn't know where to start. "Hey," I said, finally voice tentative. "Hey," she replied, just enough to acknowledge me. Then silence. She talked about small things, a meeting at work, errands, as if the hours we'd spent together, the closeness we'd almost touched, hadn't existed. I nodded, smiled, murmured responses that fell hollow. But inside, I was turning over every word, every hesitation, every brush of a hand that had meant more than I could say. Later, I saw her from across the street. She was with someone I didn't recognize, laughing softly, leaning slightly toward them. My chest tightened, not with jealousy exactly, but the strange sting of someone slipping out of the frame you'd thought you occupied. I imagined the stories I wasn't part of, the moments I wouldn't witness. When I tried to text her that night, the words didn't form. I miss you. Are you okay? Can we talk? Each attempt stalled mid-thought. Eventually, I put the phone down, fingers hovering over the screen, a message unsent, a door unknocked. I walked past her apartment a few nights later. Lights were on in the living room, shadows moving behind curtains. I imagined her moving carefully, deliberately, as if rehearsing how not to meet me in the hallway. And I imagined her thinking the same about me. I didn't feel heartbroken. I felt paused, like life forgot to finish the sentence. Her absence became a presence, filling every quiet moment with what-ifs. I replayed our small gestures, the brush of fingers, the laughter over spilled sugar, the tentative, almost confession on the riverbank. Each memory was sharp and soft at the same time. I tried to move on in small ways. I went to the bookstore, the cafe, walked the river, same as before, but everything felt slightly out of sync. The world continued, but the space between us had been rewritten, measured in silence and empty chairs. One night, I typed out a message on my phone, fingers hovering over send. I'll wait. If you want, you know where I am. And then I deleted it. The screen went dark. I folded my hands over the cup of coffee I hadn't touched, staring at the corner of the cafe where she might have been. I didn't know if she would come back, or if we'd ever cross the line we'd skirted so delicately. For now, the chair remained empty. The message remained unsent. And I stood there, suspended, in that quiet space where hope and uncertainty collided. I found myself at her door again, hands empty, heart heavier than I expected. The hallway smelled faintly of laundry and the faint scent of jasmine she always carried. I had rehearsed nothing. Every word I wanted to say scattered before I even lifted my hand to knock. She opened the door before I could. Her eyes widened just slightly, surprise, maybe relief. She didn't step back. I didn't step forward. We just stood there, the space between us taut with months of unsent messages and half-remembered touches. I came by. I said, voice low, unsure. You thought maybe what? She interrupted gently, almost laughing at herself. Her hands tucked in her coat pockets, thumbs brushing the fabric, a gesture I knew too well. I swallowed. Maybe we could talk. Really talk. She nodded slowly. Okay. We moved into her kitchen. Small apartment, cluttered, but lived in. She poured 2 cups of tea. No words, just the motion of familiarity. I sat across from her, hands wrapped around the warm cup, feeling the weight of all the moments we hadn't had, the conversations left unspoken. I wasn't ignoring you, she said finally, her voice quiet, deliberate. I was afraid of losing control, of losing myself. I nodded because I understood more than she might have realized. I was scared too, scared I'd ruin it, or ruin you. She glanced at me then, really looked, as if measuring whether I meant it. You didn't ruin anything, she said softly. Not by being here, not by noticing. I wanted to reach for her hand, to let her know everything I felt without words, but I paused. The risk of vulnerability was sharp and clear. To say more might be too much. To stay silent might be too late. She leaned slightly, resting her elbow on the table. Her fingers brushed mine, light, almost accidental, but deliberate enough that I felt the thrum of something fragile. I let my hand stay there, stilling the tremor in my chest. I don't know what comes next, she murmured, eyes on mine, unflinching. But I want to try, if that's okay. I nodded, a small smile breaking across my face, unguarded. Okay, no grand declarations, No promises I couldn't keep, just the recognition of each other, and the quiet courage it took to let that recognition exist without collapsing into something louder. We sipped tea in silence after that, hands occasionally brushing, voices just soft enough to let the world continue outside the window. The tension had softened, not disappeared, but it felt like we were finally standing somewhere together, rather than at the edge of something unspoken. Her smile, small and unforced, met mine. My fingers lingered near hers, careful, patient. "Okay," she said again, and I understood it as more than a word. A signal that we had begun to navigate the space we'd been avoiding, the risk we'd finally allowed ourselves to share. And in that ordinary, sun-fading evening, nothing extraordinary happened except that we existed honestly in the same room. Weeks passed, slow and steady, like sunlight stretching across the kitchen table. I found her there one morning at 8:47 a.m., cup of black coffee in hand, the faint steam curling toward the ceiling. I hadn't meant to arrive then, but I liked the way mornings felt ordinary when she was there, like the world hadn't shifted entirely, just enough for us to exist together quietly. We didn't announce anything. No declarations, no dramatic pauses, just small gestures that spoke louder than words. She poured the tea. I carried the empty cups to the sink. Her fingers brushed mine when passing sugar. I remembered to fold the napkin she always left crumpled beside her cup. One afternoon, we walked to the river, the same bench from before, waiting silently beneath the trees. She leaned against me lightly, her coat brushing mine, neither of us speaking. The city hummed around us, but the weight of those months of hesitation, unsent messages, and almost moments seemed to have settled into something quieter, softer. I watched her sip tea from the thermos she insisted on carrying everywhere. The way she tilted her head, a subtle smile tugging at her lips, made the air feel warmer. She noticed my eyes on her and glanced up, a small, shared recognition passing between us, a conversation in silence. We kept routines: Saturday cafe visits, Tuesday bookstore strolls, late-night phone calls where neither of us said anything urgent but still felt connected. The boundaries that once stretched between us, age, friendship, fear, had not disappeared. They'd simply been negotiated quietly, patiently, with respect for the small fragility of each other. I still caught myself staring sometimes, at the way her hair caught the sunlight, at the flicker of amusement in her eyes when I muttered something awkward, at the quiet way she reached for my hand without speaking. But now, it wasn't longing that tightened my chest. It was ease, recognition, the slow relief of belonging somewhere. She laughed one evening over a spilled cup of coffee, shaking her head. I grinned, letting her tease me, as she always had, and felt the old tension slip like water through fingers. It wasn't perfect, not by any measure, but it was ours, grounded, ordinary, aching in its simplicity. Sometimes I think about all the moments that didn't happen, the near confessions, the unsent messages, the benches we almost sat on alone, and I realize that without them, the quiet peace we have now wouldn't feel earned. She handed me the thermos that morning, our fingers brushing again. I held it a little longer than necessary. She didn't pull away. I didn't pull back. And in that ordinary touch, I understood what it had always been. Not a dramatic rush, not a storybook romance, but a small, steadfast presence that endured through hesitation, silence, and uncertainty. A love that lived in coffee cups, morning light, and the spaces between words. I smiled to myself, folding the napkin she'd left beside her cup, and thought, this is enough. This is how it was meant to be,